Happy Vlogmas Day 14! And today I am going to be talking about how you could give your Christmas a bit of a travel theme. When I started doing my 12 videos of Christmas, my 12 tips of Christmas for Vlogmas, I asked people what it was they wanted me to talk about. And one of the things that came up was Christmas food, which is a really fun one because you get some weird and wonderful concoctions from around the world, and I'm including some of the UK food within that. So obviously if you're in the UK, like I am, turkey is traditional with all the trimmings, although interestingly I found out that turkey's only really been a tradition since about the 50s, and before that it was always very much a luxury food. These days it's kind of hard to imagine Christmas without it, although I'm at my brother's this year and apparently we're having fish, so I'm about to find out. You have to have sprouts with it. This seems to be a rule because I think everyone can agree sprouts are vile. Does anyone like sprouts? I don't know anyone who likes sprouts. People who tolerate sprouts and pretend to, but and then you have things like pigs in blankets, and if you haven't come across those before, they are little sausages wrapped in bacon. And my mum always used to do 3 different sauces. We'd have bread sauce, onion sauce and cranberry sauce on the side. Just because some people liked it, some people didn't. I gotta say the cranberry sauce tended to go. The rest of it got used up as leftovers along with all the rest of the turkey. But if you don't have turkey, or you're sitting watching this in another country and thinking, what is she talking about? I tracked down a few really fun ideas from around the world. Claire from Tinbox Traveller put in a request for this, and she came up with one herself from Sweden, where apparently you eat blue cheese on ginger biscuits. I'm not totally convinced by the blue cheese, but I like the cheese and ginger idea, so and I never need any excuse to eat ginger biscuits, so I think I might have to go off and try that. But here are a few more from around Europe. First up, Germany. And in Germany it's traditional to have roast goose with red cabbage, which doesn't sound too bad actually. And millions of different sweet kinds of things. There's all the ones that we tend to know like Stollen and Lebkuchen, but there's Pfeffernusse cookies as well, little biscuits, which I had the year I lived in Germany, and they are delicious. And apparently there's a tradition that if you don't eat well on Christmas Day, you will be haunted by demons. So if you need an excuse, the Germans have one ready. Then there are quite a few countries in Europe where the tradition is to have fish, and it all goes back to different rules about fasting over Christmas and in the run-up. In Slovakia they always have a carp, and apparently this is such a big thing, and you plan for ages in advance to get your carp, and some families even keep them in the bathtub to make sure that they are all as fresh as they can possibly be. Which sounds an enormous amount of work. I feel like there's always quite enough on over Christmas without keeping a fish alive. But there you go. There's something similar in Italy where they have a fish-based feast on Christmas Eve, the Feast of the 7 Fishes, and you have things like fried eel there, which doesn't sound too bad actually. Quite fancy a bit of fried eel. Then there's Iceland. You can always guarantee Iceland will come up in a list of weird foods, not just for the fermented shark either. Although apparently on December the 23rd they do have fermented skate, which sounds equally delightful. Apparently it smells so strong that people in Iceland will go out to restaurants to eat it rather than actually have it in their home, which does beg the question of why are you eating it? Sounds even worse than sprouts. Actually on Christmas Day you could have puffin, you could have reindeer and all kinds of other things. Then, unsurprisingly, there are different traditions in Africa for African Christians. So in Egypt and I think in Ethiopia too, they work to a different calendar and so celebrate Christmas later than in the UK. It's usually early in January, and they have a special kind of lamb stew called fata. Doesn't sound bad actually, sounds good for the beginning of January. And then there's Madagascar. Madagascar has its own kind of treats. Apparently, for Christmas, lychees are the things to eat. That's your big Christmas treat there. Not a big fan of lychees either. I'm coming across as really picky here. I do like pretty much everything else about Madagascar, especially its lemurs though. Then over a bit further afield to Puerto Rico. And this one isn't a food, this one is a drink, but this is one I can definitely get behind. It's a kind of special eggnog made with coconut milk and rum. Sounds pretty good to me. And then lastly there's Japan. Just like Iceland, you can normally guarantee that Japan crops up in a list like this. And that's because they do have one very unusual Christmas tradition, and this in a country of course where remarkably few people are Christian and Christmas isn't really a big holiday. But thanks to a big ad campaign in the 70s, Kentucky Fried Chicken persuaded the Japanese that this is what you had to have on Christmas Day. Apparently people place their orders weeks in advance to make sure that they get their KFC. So there you go. If you don't fancy having turkey and don't fancy having sprouts, because who fancies having sprouts, you could have puffin, KFC, carp, or a nice lamb stew. Take your pick. I'll be back with some more Christmassy and travel related tips for the rest of Vlogmas. Thanks for watching. Bye!